All right, good morning, everybody. It's about 8:55 here, so I just want to jump in and test the sound. If someone can give me a thumbs up, I would greatly appreciate it. If you guys can just hear me, give me a thumbs up really quickly. We're going to get started here in about 4 minutes. So this is the second session of the day. I hope everyone is enjoying everything so far. Guys, let me know if you can hear me. Awesome. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right, now that I know that you guys can hear me, if you guys haven't had a chance to do so, if you guys haven't had a chance in one of the previous sessions, or if this is your first session that you are actually attending live, if you can just take a few moments really quickly and answer some of the poll questions we have down at the bottom for you guys. There's about 3 poll questions in there. Good afternoon from Sweden. Well, good afternoon. If you guys can just take a couple of seconds to answer those, that we would greatly appreciate it. Just a few seconds. It won't take very long. That would be great. We're going to start here in about 3 minutes or so. And if you guys have any questions, if the sound goes out, or if you guys have any questions, you can either ask in the question panel down at the bottom, or you can just put it directly into the chat and I will see it. So just hang tight and we'll get started here in about 3 minutes. All right, it is 9 o'clock. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. And like I said before, if you guys haven't, for everyone who's just now joining, if you guys haven't had a chance to answer the poll questions at the bottom, please take a few minutes right now to answer those really quickly. That would be great. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Adam. Whenever you're ready, you can take over.
All right, great. Everybody can still see my screen, hopefully. Crystal, we should be good there, right?
Yeah.
All right. So welcome back to Azure Data Week. Welcome back to, welcome to our ultimate guide to cloud migrations. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Adam Jorgensen. I'm blessed to be part of the leadership team here at Pragmatic Works. And what we wanted to do with this session is take the almost hundreds of conversations that I have every year with customers all around the country and all around the world, and kind of try to distill as much of the guidance down into something that we could consume in an hour, because obviously planning your entire cloud migration does take longer than an hour. But talking about the things that are most important so that you have sort of a checklist, if you will, to work off of, that's super attainable. And that was our goal with this particular session. And in doing that, I spent a lot of time with our team and a lot of time with some of our customers who have gone through this process with us to make sure that, it's not just my opinion on some of these things that we're talking about. It's really the collective wisdom of our amazing team and the collective experience of many of our awesome customers. And so when I talk about things that are priorities, and when I talk about things that you need to focus on, that may not be every single thing that needs to be done, and I'll elaborate on that. But those are the things where people either got tripped up or felt especially glad that they had a plan or a path forward or a guide or an advisor, something like that. So when we talk about what an ultimate guide to cloud migrations really is, what we mean is we're talking about things like best practices. What are the things that we really want to make sure that we focus on? As I mentioned, the mechanics. So how are we actually going to go through this process? What should the steps be? What goes into those steps? Who should be involved? All of that kind of stuff. And then what kind of skills are we going to need? I mean, obviously, if we're not really fully deployed in the cloud, or if we've piloted it or put up a database or an application, we're not really doing anything at scale. There's a big difference between running something in a cloud environment, which is basically maybe just like a hosting change, and moving your data center, moving your data platform, moving your application platform up into Microsoft's cloud or in a multi-cloud environment. So we'll talk about what kind of skills are needed, and I'll elaborate on those. Finances, somebody's got to pay for it. The cloud isn't free. How do we approach finances? One of the biggest things we hear from our customers about 6 to 12 months before they're ready to begin making larger moves into the cloud is their number one request: how much is it going to cost operationally? So they're used to buying hardware, depreciating it off. They're used to that motion. They're not used to a monthly bill for operating costs for the cloud. And they don't want to just move everything up there, and then they thought it was going to be $50,000 a month or $5,000 a month, and they get a bill and it's $100,000 a month, right? Because going back is pretty hard. And so getting clarity is really the thing that so many customers said they really valued, is, moving past some of the noise, focusing on, their world, their environment. And there's a lot of noise when we talk about moving to the cloud, digital transformation, disrupting your business, right? I could have done an entire presentation on buzzwords that I don't think are helpful. But in reality, the thing that customers and our team agreed was the most important thing you can achieve about your own plan is clarity and focus. And so my goal today is to help point you in the right direction about the things that you should be focused on each step of the way, and to talk through those to give you some frame of reference if you don't have it already. And if you do already have a frame of reference, I'm going to do my best to leave some time for some Q&A, and we can certainly follow up afterwards. You guys all have my email address. It's ajorgensen@pragmaticworks.com. Please feel free to contact me directly. That comes right into my inbox. It's not a marketing email. You guys can reach out to me directly if there's something that you have a question on that we don't cover or you want to talk about more. We also are going to talk about the timeline. So how long should this take? I don't want to give you the consulting answer of, well, it depends, right? But I'm going to give you some real numbers and to talk through some real examples of, different types of migrations that we've done and why they took the time that they took. We're going to talk through that. And then I'm going to point you at a small number of, really valuable resources at the end, the ones that, really kind of give you the most bang for the buck. It doesn't really do you any good to have a list of 5,000 resources. You can't sort through those. If you have to build a database in the cloud to manage all of the resources that talk about databases in the cloud, that's not really going to help you. So we've done a lot of legwork to try and distill that down on our side, as well as drive some of the most valuable Microsoft resources towards you. So we'll talk about that here as we get to the end. All right, so let's jump in. And I've framed most of our conversation today around this idea of an ultimate migration timeline. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about, we'll talk about skills and a couple of other things in a few minutes, but a lot of what we're going to talk about exists right here on this slide. And the reason I did that is because I wanted to give you one view of the different things that are happening as we move through the process. And so the most important thing you can do is adapt this to what you believe will really work at your company or your customer if you're a consultant. And what we do, frankly, when we go in is we take this and we adapt it to what will work for that customer. That customer may say, oh, well, we've already done all of our planning, and so that stage is done. And we say, okay, that's great. We just need to get caught up with you and frankly, make sure that it's all been done, right? Because a lot of customers have never done this before, or companies who haven't done this before, they've missed some steps. And so my goal is to walk through each of these with you and explain why the step is important, talk about what you actually need to do in that step, and then we'll talk about timing and things like that. And so by the time we finish going through this process this morning or afternoon, depending upon where you are, we will have covered sort of one pass all the way through a major system migration. And that's really our goal. And then we'll talk about skills and some other things to help support you in the process. So the very first thing that we want to do is learn. And you can call it learn, you can call it inventory, you can call it assess, you can use whatever verb you want to use. I like learn because most of the time you're going to find new things that you didn't know or things that you had forgotten. And the first thing you need to do is go learn about your environment. Most of you probably know the part of your environment that you work with every day. I would expect nothing less. But you may not know about the infrastructure that runs on. Let's say you're a DBA. You may not know about the infrastructure because it's managed for you. You may not know about the networking components behind the scenes and how that's routed. You may not interface with a lot of the other teams. Maybe you do and you're totally cross-functional and you understand all of that stuff, and that's great. But it's not just learning about your environment. It's actually documenting that environment and understanding where each piece fits, how it fits together, what the dependencies are, and really making sure that you have a good understanding of which pieces of that you might like to try to move to the cloud. Don't worry so much yet about, is it the right fit for the cloud? Is it ready? Just understand what you have. A lot of issues crop up in projects in the pilot phase or the scale phase because people didn't really understand their existing environment. If you make assumptions and you move forward with bad information, it's not going to work, right? Second, you want to learn about cloud services and architecture, which you're doing a great job of because you're here this week, and that's a great start. It's a great way to fill in gaps if there's particular things you want to learn about. But let's say you're in charge of ETL and data integration, or you're in charge of database administration or development for a particular application or a data backend or business intelligence. The services you're going to use in Azure are similar in a lot of ways to what you use today, but they are different. And the way that the architectures work to connect them together and pipeline that data and move it around are also different. And you need to understand why they're different, why those design decisions need to be made. There's great, fantastic free training out there from Pragmatic Works and Microsoft and others, and there's lots of resources to learn about these things. And I'll point you to some a little bit later, but that's a really important foundational skill that you pick up. It's not necessarily something that you need to go get certified in unless that's beneficial for your business or for your role at your company. But you definitely want to understand how cloud services work, why they're designed to work that way, things like serverless platform or database as a service, and then something like IaaS or infrastructure as a service, which would be SQL on a VM or business intelligence or analytics applications running on a VM. Next, you want to look at what are some migration best practices. And one of the resources I will point you to later on is the Azure Migration Center. There's great case studies there. And this one can go hand in hand with the last one, which is really think about engaging a partner for guidance. That feels a little bit self-serving because, of course, Pragmatic Works does this work all the time. But if you're looking to shortcut and move past a lot of the typical challenges, a partner who's done this before can really help save you time and money and really empower and educate your team along the way. So there's great ways to engage a partner without saying, oh, I'm not going to go pay, huge money to have them move my entire system. There's lots of times where we just help a customer get through their pilot and then they're empowered and ready to go. So if you have the right partner, it doesn't have to be, a long-term costly partnership. It just is something that really enables and moves you forward. And so if you're focused on learning first and you learn about your environment, you educate yourself about cloud architectures and services, you look at migration best practices. Microsoft has great events at their local offices where you can go in for a day or a few hours and they'll kind of talk through your scenario. So there's lots of different ways for you to get educated on these things. Once you feel that, and that really maybe 3 to 6 months in terms of time. This really, if you take too long, you may say, well, I can't really assess my entire environment in 6 months and blah, blah, blah. That's fine. But, part of the challenge with cloud migrations is when they drag on. I have a saying, I didn't coin it. I heard it somewhere a long time ago, but it's projects do not get better with age. They just don't. They don't get better with age. Anytime I'm brought in, I'm in an executive roundtable and they say, we've been working on ABC for the last 2 years, I immediately pivot to talking about sort of roadblocks and friction. So we want to keep a crisp cadence for this first part of your migration. It shouldn't take any more than 3 to 6 months. It should take a few weeks maybe to get a handle on your environment, maybe a month or so to get picked up on cloud services and architecture. Because again, you're not trying to go to a 500 level on things. You're just trying to get a good understanding of how things fit together. And then another month maybe on migration best practices and how different parts of the environment get moved. And that means you can spend a few hours a week, 3 to 4 weeks, and move that ball forward. All right. So if you feel like you're starting to get stagnated there, think about things like, am I going too deep? Am I spending too much time on this? Can I come back to it and keep going? Keep yourself accountable to keep that timeline crisp. Once you have a good foundation of that knowledge, you can move on to your planning. And the first most important piece of planning is understanding your motives. So I talk to a lot of customers and they say things like, oh, we're moving our database platform to the cloud. And I say, why? And they say, because we want to be in the cloud. And I say, why? I'm like your 3-year-old child. Just why, over and over again. And ultimately, we need to get to the bottom of that answer. Is it, well, we want to reduce cost? Is it, well, we think it's going to give our business more flexibility? Is it, well, we want better, sort of line of sight to charge back, or we want more creative performance options, or we need to be able to ingest data faster and our partner has all the data in the cloud. What's the motive? I'll give you a great example of this. We work with a lot of companies who do business directly with Walmart. And with Walmart's large partnership with Azure, those companies can now only share data with Walmart in the same cloud. They have to run certain systems and certain types of transactions in Azure. And so they're now moving those systems from either premises-based solutions or other clouds or hosting, wherever they may be. They're making a move to fully integrate those into Azure. So their motive isn't because they want to. Their motive is because their biggest customer, Walmart, largest brick and mortar retailer in the world, is saying they have to. And so that's a real driver. And so once you understand your motives, then you can move on, because that's going to drive all of your other decisions. It's going to drive priorities. It's going to drive architectural decisions. It's going to drive lots of things. And then once you understand why you're doing it, you want to inventory your systems. Now, you can do this off an existing inventory if you have it, but I highly recommend either getting a tool that scans and does assessments based specifically on cloud migrations. And there's a number of them that are really good that I'm happy to recommend if you send me an email. This is also where a partner can be helpful, because partners have some tools that automate some of this stuff. Once you know what you have, and you've already done your learning and you know what cloud services and architecture and migration process you're thinking about, then you want to go through and look at your core team of architects, developers, data professionals, analytics folks, anybody who's going to be working in this environment, supporting this environment, or delivering on the migration, and find skill gaps and be really honest with yourselves. This is a new thing for you. There's no reason to feel bad that you're not an expert in Azure Data Factory, because that's what you're going to have to use to move data all around in Azure. You may be great at SSIS, but if you've just played around with Azure Data Factory, you're going to want to get better at that. And actually, speaking of Azure Data Factory, it's just an incredibly cool product that they're constantly innovating on. So it's a lot of fun to work in. So you want to take a hard look at what are those team skill gaps and where are they going to leave you hanging? And you want to prioritize, are some of these skills things that we need to have, quote unquote, in the building, right, or in the team? Or are some of these just skills that we really only need during the migration? And then you can, maybe you get a contractor or a third party to help you with some of those skills, but you can focus on the team skills that you really want to develop. There's great training. Of course, Pragmatic Works has great free training if you want to take advantage of that. We also have great on-demand training, but there's lots of free training. I'll point you to some of those resources to get your team ramped up. And there's great training from Microsoft that helps, that they make available for you guys. Next, you're going to prioritize your opportunities. You may say, I've got these 5 virtual machines that are on hardware that's end of life, and they're not mission critical, and they would be a great first migration to move to the cloud. That's a great opportunity. You may say, hey, we have this application that we're in the process of rewriting. We were just going to point it at this SQL server on the back end, but actually Cosmos DB would be a much better fit. And so we're going to use Cosmos DB in the cloud. That's not really migrating, but more of a refactor, re-architecture, right? We may say, look, we've already piloted and gotten our first set of VMs or first set of databases in the cloud, and we're ready to go for a bigger push. Or, hey, we've got some M&A activity, some merger and acquisition activity happening, and this company's coming in, and they're in an old data center, and they have to be out of their data center. And it always seems like in a week every time we get brought in. So if they have to be out pretty soon or by the end of the year, let's focus on moving their systems first. So you talk through and prioritize those opportunities as a team with your leadership, and based on how you want to attack that. The next thing you want to do in your plan is align some business expectations. Is there going to be some outage? Is there going to be some disruption? Is there going to be a period of time where you're not enhancing the existing application or database or analytics solution because you're prepping to move it? Are you going to be sort of, I don't want to say unresponsive, but just not moving forward on net new functionality for any period of time, and that the business needs to understand? Does the business understand why you're even doing this? Do they get a benefit? Do they get a net benefit from being in the cloud? Or for moving this to a new platform, for moving from, let's say, SQL 2008 up to SQL 2016 in the cloud on a VM, or to Azure SQL Data Warehouse in the cloud, or SQL DB or managed instance? Do they understand the benefit to them? They don't need to know all the technical benefits, but do they understand their value? Is it going to be cheaper? Are they going to get better costs? Are they going to get better sort of chargeback transparency, that type of thing? So make sure you talk to the business, make sure you involve them, make sure they understand the plan as much as they sort of want to understand it. They may or may not want to be, more or less involved. And then the last piece of your plan is, don't create a migration budget just for that project. Create a 12-month migration budget. Migrations go through seasons. You'll move a lot of stuff, and then you're supporting it, and then you're optimizing it. We'll talk about what that means. But you don't want to budget a migration as a standalone project, because there's always post-project work. There's always support to be done. There's always enhancements. Once you get on a new platform, you start thinking, oh, look at all this stuff we can do with this new platform. So I like to recommend to customers, you look at a 12-month budget cycle for migrations. You can do multiple migrations, multiple passes, multiple application groups or server groups or data centers, however you want to break it up. But operate the migration almost like it's its own department or own team. And when you do that, you can start including things like your cost estimates. You can start including things like your OpEx estimates. You can include things like your staff costs, your tooling costs, the cost of cloud compute to do piloting and dev tests and those types of things. Don't forget dev test in your plan and in your 12-month migration budget. Dev test is usually less expensive on Azure, and there's some great ways to deliver it, but everything in the cloud does have some kind of cost. And so it's something for you to really keep in mind. I spend a lot of time helping customers go through and build basically analyzing their migration budgets and looking at sort of what did we not think about kind of questions to make sure that they just feel like they have a comprehensive handle on it when they go through budgeting process. And so that's something that, even though it's one little box down there at the bottom, can take an outsized portion of that 6 to 8 weeks. So I like to look at, have a meeting, have kind of a fun lunch, even if you want to. Bring some pizza or some food in, bring some coffee in, have a meeting and talk about the motives. Talk about why you guys really want to move forward in the cloud. What's really driving it, right? Write that down, get it on the whiteboard, instill it in everybody so they understand the need and the motive. Second, go through that inventory. That should take really no more than 2 weeks to really inventory your systems, identifying your team skill gaps. We do this actually with a kind of just a quick survey assessment that we just do digitally, and we encourage people to be honest and transparent about it, and we compare that to what the new architecture is probably going to look like, and it's pretty quick. It takes maybe a couple of days to get that done and get that information gathered and get the team moving in the right direction. So prioritizing opportunities, usually coming out of motives and inventory, that sometimes even sort of takes care of itself, although it is something you want to make sure you write down and get buy-in on. And then aligning business expectations and creating the budget is sometimes kind of the last 2 weeks. So, you can really get this done in about 6, maybe 8 weeks at the outside. If it's going to take longer than that, you're trying to do too much. Your plan is too big. You're inventorying too much. You're trying to work with too big of a team. Something's off scale. So you want to take a hard look at, what you're trying to, don't sort of quote unquote bite off more than you can chew, right? Once you've got your budget, business aligned, teams going through their training, you know what systems you have, you know why you're doing it, you know what you're moving. Now we actually get to move stuff, which is so great. That's actually the fun part. And so as you go through, you want to keep sort of a running architecture standards. Do not, I repeat, do not, absolutely not under any circumstances, try to build out a comprehensive architecture standard for the cloud before you migrate everything to the cloud. It will be wrong because you just don't know what you don't know. Have someone on the team whose role it is to help define this as you go along so that you're not slowing down progress to figure out, well, how are we going to name all of our ADF workflows, and how are we going to, where are we going to, what type of storage permissions are we going to use for our standard? And you will have to decide those things along the way. And some of it you can decide up front, but you can't decide all of it up front. And what that will turn into is analysis paralysis, and you will stall this effort. And I have been into customers where they say, we've been working on our architectural standards for the cloud for the last year. And I said, well, with everything that's changed in the last year in the cloud, do you feel like your standards are out of date? And they said, probably. We feel like we've basically wasted a year. And unfortunately, I've heard that more than once. So the second thing you want to do is design basic automation for those first workloads. So if you want to make sure that certain packages are being run, if you want to make sure that the dev test is being shut down overnight, pilot those automation components for your first workloads, because those are going to be the one, just incredibly valuable from a cost saving and a time saving perspective. But understanding how the automation works, whether it's something like DevOps and CI/CD, or whether it's something just as sort of functional as what I mentioned before, which is, really running through like VM automation and things like that. It's really important that you pilot that as part of the workload. Next, write up what your new architecture is going to look like. Draw it out on the whiteboard. Get a high-level document put together. Make sure everybody understands the destination and where you're going. And then look at moving those first workloads. Get them packaged up. Get them moved. Test any DR or failover scenarios. This is super important. I have a customer that made basically a year-long migration journey. They had this incredible cloud environment. And they said, oh, we're running in all these different regions and everything is set up for basically no failover required. Everything just routes where it needs to route, and it's magical. And you guys can't see me this morning, but I'm making air quotes and pacing around my office. So everything was perfect, except for one thing. They didn't pull the plug and test it. And it wasn't set up correctly. There was a piece of the networking components that weren't set up correctly. The Active Directory and identity management wasn't the same across regions because they hadn't documented what they were trying to do, and two different teams did it differently. And, we got brought in basically to figure out why the plug pulling, didn't work. And that's what we ultimately figured out for them. But they were lucky. They didn't actually have a disaster that created this problem. They had a minor outage due to a human error, which they fixed quickly and realized that, they were in this situation. So any significant issue, and they would have been up that proverbial creek. Once you know that the DR, the failover, the reroutes, all that stuff basically works great, run performance tests and get a baseline. How many times have we been in a conversation where somebody's saying, I think it's running slow? How do we know? How many transactions per second can we process? How many orders on the website can we process? How much data can we push into the system in a certain amount of time? How fast do the ADF workflows actually run? How fast do these different things occur, and at what volume? We need to understand that out of the gate so that we can measure it on a regular basis and make sure that if we need to increase performance or VM size or instance size, if we need to use any of that flexibility from the cloud, that we're not just doing it because we feel like it's important, that we really understand and can make sure that we get the ROI. Once you've migrated that first workload and everything's running and you know how fast it's supposed to be, go talk to the business, talk to the users, figure out if what you think is great is what they think is great. Get feedback from the users. Ask them what they think. I know that can be terrifying and dangerous, but I promise you all want the same thing at the end of the day. And last but not least, as you move into the next phase or a scale phase, consider handing off support of that environment or maybe optimization of that environment to a third party. A lot of the things that we run into with customers is around their help desk really isn't ready to support this new environment. And so again, that's where a partner can help, right? We can take support for the Azure or the data environment while we're able to transition your help desk up to being able to handle it, right? So, again, filling a stopgap, filling an extended support need so you can focus on continuing to scale and drive migrations. So now we understand our environment, we've planned, now we've piloted. The pilot really should be able to be done in about 8 to 12 weeks. If it's longer than 12 weeks, that's 3 months. You're probably just biting off more than you can chew, or it's not enough of a priority internally, so it doesn't keep getting bumped for everything else. And so I would revisit either the scope and size of what you're trying to pilot, or I would revisit the priority with the right people who can reset the priorities. From pilot, we go to scale. So now we want to be able to go and do multiple migrations at the same time. We want to move larger workloads. We want to be able to have multiple teams get engaged and scale the work and so on and so forth, right? And so first thing we want to look at is building a migration COE, or Center of Excellence. And what I really mean by that, it does not have to be dedicated people. These are not people who are going to go sit in a conference room all day and just be paid to be thinkers about all things migration. And, they're sort of the big giant head, if you will, of migration knowledge. That's not really how it needs to be. Really what we're looking at is somebody from each stakeholder team who is sort of the SME or subject matter expert on migrations for that team. So for example, the DBA part of the team should have somebody who's a SME. Doesn't mean they're the only person who understands the migrations or the technology, but they're maybe the ones who were involved in the pilot. And usually what I recommend is the team that was involved in the pilot gets sort of a little bit of expanded responsibility, and they help lead and drive some of the scale. Because our real goal here is to scale multiple migration swim lanes so that maybe we're moving, 40 to 50 databases a month, or maybe we're moving 30 to 100 servers a month, or maybe we're moving, different sites or branch locations. However we want to scale that out, your migration in a smaller company can be very linear. If you have, if you're a 10 to 30 million, $50 million company, you may have enough systems where you can just do one right after the other and you don't need to scale. We work with companies like that all the time, and it's typically a very smooth process. And usually there's some dedicated staff to help make that move. In a large Fortune 100 bank, or in a large retail or manufacturing organization, especially multinational or global companies, we can't do that. We can't run at that speed. We have to scale. We have to be able to do migrations at scale and in parallel. At one point last year, we had a company that was a customer of ours. We were running parallel migrations in 37 countries at the same time. And that is definitely multiple swim lanes and required some really incredible cross-functional teams. And so what you want to look at is, what are the things that can run in parallel? How do we really begin to prioritize and execute that? And getting all of that spun up and kicked off is really based on deciding what's going to be migrated and what's going to be built new. I had a customer last month who said, hey, we have 50,000 reports that we need to migrate to Azure. And I said, respectfully, I doubt that that's true. And the reason for that is you're probably not going to reuse every single one of those reports. You're probably not even using all of them now. And so we did some analysis and figured out that out of 50,000 reports, they were really only using about 6,000 to 7,000. And those 6,000 to 7,000 were actually sort of also built into Dynamics 365, which they were also migrating to at the same time. because they were all individual performance reports for salespeople and administrative staff and management, right? They didn't need to go rebuild those. They were just in MicroStrategy from the legacy system. And so we were able to basically cut that number down to about 3,200, something like that, and deploy those in Power BI, which ultimately, became really more like maybe 600 Power BI reports, because each report can have dashboards and different tabs and, ultimately showcase more of an analytic stream of analysis, as opposed to, hey, this is my one report for this and this is my one report for that. Also, lots of legacy data warehouses or appliances or other things are being redesigned and built new, right? And so a lot of our customers have two swim lanes. They have the new architecture work and they have migration work, and they build a migration team and a new architecture team. And so we support them differently based on, obviously which stream that we're engaged with. The migration team is moving things that move easily and won't get a lot of benefit from necessarily being re-architected. So that's your VM hosted applications, your web applications, depending upon how they're actually architected. But anything that could benefit from new backend data stores, or certainly legacy data warehouses and BI initiatives, anything that could really benefit from Power BI as a front end, all those things get queued up to be rebuilt and refactored. And that can feel like it's going to take a really long time, but in reality, it doesn't. Our average, migration and rebuilding a data warehouse is, 6 months or less, which is actually, not a lot of time in the data warehousing world. And then that allows you to build repeatable cloud migration project kind of footprints, right? With repeatable sprints that just get executed over and over and over again, that are super repeatable, that let you actually scale. I would recommend you have a project manager or a project management team that's dedicated just to running migrations, or to running the new builds in the cloud. There's kind of specialized knowledge that they will pick up about that, and that's super important as well. Think about creating additional roles specific to the cloud. Once you get enough in the cloud, you need a cloud architect. You need somebody whose sole job it is to take that cloud environment and the architectures that are running in it and really not only advocate for it internally, but really understand and stay on the cusp of what's changing, what's coming, how does it affect your business, what opportunities does it present. That's a really valuable role. Architects in the past had a similar role, but the rate of change was a lot slower. And the reason that the cloud architect is so important, and the reason a lot of larger companies have multiple cloud architects, is because just to keep up with the rate of change in the world of data, for example, it can take more than one person. There's a lot happening. I have a feed that I hooked up into our internal Microsoft Teams implementation that is basically just the announcements from all the Microsoft teams around data in Azure. And I had to turn it off because it was posting like 14 times a day, and every one of them was a different announcement. And so there's a lot of rate of change and a lot of noise, and it doesn't all apply to you. And you don't need to know about it all, but you need somebody who understands that environment to drive the strategic direction for it, to own the accountability, to own the empowerment of the teams that are going to be working on it. And so think about how that kind of role and who would own that in your organization. Last but not least, now that we're scaling swim lanes, we've got to expand the team training and capability. We can't just use that core team of, a handful of people anymore. The larger team has to have a broader set of skills. And skills is actually my next slide. We're going to talk a little bit about that here in just a second. But skills are super important. But again, everybody doesn't need to be a 400 or 500 level on things. A 200 to 300 level is great to get started, maybe get through a basic certification on something if there's one that aligns. But the certification is less important than being confident and being functional and being able to build and prototype yourself in the environment. So scale can take any amount of time, depending on how much you have to deliver. But typically each scale iteration, so packaging up the next thing, moving it forward, and then scaling that out typically takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months. The longest time block in this phase is usually due to hiring or trying to add new staff that's cloud savvy, cloud data savvy, etc. We find ourselves in the position a lot where, we're filling a gap for 6 to 12 months for a customer while they train up folks internally or while they try to recruit and bring in some new talent to build that team. And we're happy to do that, but we definitely are always pushing customers to, have the right talent in-house and the right talent to do what they need to do. Last but not least, we want to optimize. And so as you deploy something, it will go into an optimize phase while something else is going through pilot. And so all of these things sort of stagger and move through. But the optimize is where we look at the operational efficiency of what we've just deployed. Sorry, I'm losing my voice already this early. The operational side includes things like pricing and chargeback. So do you have an internal billing system? Are the subscriptions set up in a way so that you can really charge those things back to the right part of the business and the right teams? Do you have the right support structure in place, both from maybe a general help desk and also more advanced support? Do you have vendor support in place? Do you need Premier support from Microsoft or Red Hat or somebody or a particular vendor application to make sure that, if it's actually a critical, important application, that you have the right level of support at 2 a.m. When you push a new update to an application and it breaks something or something happens, right? Or, even the cloud does have outages, right? So we have to prepare for that. How are you managing the environment? Are you using Microsoft tools? Are you using third-party tools? Are you using a combination of those? Are you using something like sort of a SolarWinds suite? Or are you using something like System Center? How is your automation being managed? Do you have a job management system? Are those automation jobs doing what you need? Are you using templates for automation so that every team is doing it the same way so that the job management software can tie in? And then last but not least, has your team structure changed? Because it probably should have a little bit, or maybe a lot, depending upon what you've put in the cloud. One of the things that I spend time with customers on a lot, especially their executive teams, is now that we're in a cloud world, how does the layout of my team look different? How should it look different? I've got some new skills, I've got some new team, I've got some new people, and that doesn't mean that the team you have is the wrong team. It just means that you want to align the team around the outcomes you're trying to create. And in the cloud, one of the things that we know is that the responsibilities of the DBA are expanded. The cloud's not getting rid of the DBA, they're different responsibilities. Things like backup are very different. Backup and restore testing are very different. DR, very different because we have replicas. We have additional things that are just built in. We don't have to go in and maintain a Windows cluster for SQL Server, for example. We have different tools, different capabilities that the DBA team needs to be very familiar with. Our developers need to understand how to use things like DevOps and things like that, right? So how do we structure the team around those skill sets and around the actual work and outcomes that they're trying to create? Does it make more sense to have more of a cross-functional solution-based team? Does it make more sense to have the team in sort of the area of the platform that they oversee and then have architects that work between the teams to kind of bring everybody together? I don't think there's a right answer for that. It very much depends on your organization, your team, and your goals. I can tell you that I have not been into a customer where they've ever said anything like, this team is not the right team, and now that I'm in the cloud, I can't wait to downsize my team, right? I've never heard that from a customer. That was always sort of the big fear with moving to the cloud that we heard from a lot of technology professionals. Well, the cloud might get rid of my job. And then once everybody started getting into actually moving into the cloud, they were like, no, they need me. I'm valuable. This is valuable. This is going to transform our business and really make things a lot better. So The optimize phase really should take, really no more than about 3 months. I put 6 months in there just because, you have to, sometimes in the optimize phase, things can get deprioritized. Pricing and chargeback usually gets done really fast. Support usually gets fixed after there's sort of a emergency and support wasn't in place. Automation's usually the thing that gets sort of, if it doesn't get done in the pilot correctly, it gets cleaned up in everybody's spare time, although it shouldn't be. It really should be highly prioritized. And then team structure and skills could take 6 to 8 months to kind of settle out, because that can be done during, budget planning. It could be done during sort of annual strategic planning with the leadership team. It's not a necessary required thing. It's just something that typically happens along the road after a particular migration. So if we think about skills, I had a meeting with my team, and I know I'm biased, but they're incredible. And I said, let's talk through and just have a collective brainstorm, all of us, on this big all hands call. And so there was stuff flying in the chat, and there was this list of like 300 things that everybody should know in the cloud. And I said, well, the good news is this is a really comprehensive list. The bad news is there's not a person that could possibly know all these things. And so what I did was I rolled all those up into the most important things that we see day to day that DBAs, developers, and architects need to really have a handle on to really be successful and drive a cloud migration. For DBAs, it's all about automation, automation, automation. That's PowerShell automation, SQL automation, understanding Azure DevOps and some of those components and how they handle deployment and source control, either whether it's GitHub or something else. Non-SQL data services. I know a lot of SQL Server DBAs who only know SQL Server, and that's great because they're SQL Server DBAs. But in a cloud world, we got stuff in Postgres, we got stuff in MySQL, we've got stuff in Oracle, we've got a lot of stuff in Cosmos DB, which can look like a bunch of other databases. And so we need to understand what those data services are. We've got more and more customers on data lakes instead of data warehouses, or in addition to data warehouses. And that's a much bigger conversation than we have time for in this meeting, but I know we have sessions on that this week. Cost management, super important. When you were a DBA before, it's basically, am I out of storage? Is my performance good? You didn't really have to worry about costs because the license was paid for. Unless you were going through budget time and you were trying to do, some compression or, that type of thing, but not day to day. Day-to-day cost management, you need to understand that thing that you're administering, it costs money every hour. You need to understand how to manage and optimize that. And a lot of Microsoft-focused SQL DBAs don't know a lot about Linux. Some of them certainly do, but a lot of them don't. And I'm not a Linux expert by trade. And so this is especially close to home for me. A lot of folks are now deploying, whether it's SQL on Linux or just they're using a lot more Linux-based tools and platforms in the cloud. And so it's something that you really want to be able to be familiar with as a DBA. For developers, it's all about DevOps, CI/CD, infrastructure as code, sort of managing those types of things as a developer. Security. How do you build security into your application the right way? Super duper important. Depending upon what you're doing, there's some great resources out there for that. And then machine learning. Machine learning used to be hey, we've got guys and gals who do that. They have pocket protectors and they sit in a room. I actually have a client that we met with last year, and they said, I have a team of 40 PhDs that do nothing but data science, and they've never put anything in production. And I just broke my heart. We were walking across their big lobby. They're a huge firm, this big, beautiful lobby. And I just stopped walking, and everybody walked right past me. I couldn't believe they'd never put anything in production. And we were there to talk about how do we fix that problem. And the technology's evolved now to a point where putting machine learning and cognitive features into your applications is, it's no different than putting in a video viewer. It's no different than putting in other basic functionality because of how far that has come along, and you need to be able to do that. Also working with serverless technologies, whether it's databases or APIs or other things that just don't run on a server. They just truly are more of an endpoint type of solution. There's just new cloud architectures and new paradigms that developers really need to understand. I'm not going to get into what languages developers need to focus on or what platforms. That's really very much up to what types of solutions you're developing. These are the things that if you're going to move the solution to the cloud can handle whatever language you're using or whatever platform. These are the kinds of things that you need to be ready for. Architects, you got to understand the big picture, and you got to understand how the big picture fits together. You got to understand cloud patterns. You got to understand automation and orchestration. How do we move things? How do we start, stop, connect, share data? How do we secure it? How do we integrate not just data, but different services together? Security is also incredibly important for architects, not just application security, but is your network team up on network security? Do you understand how we're going to secure not only the information, but the traffic, data at rest? Are you also looking at things like how the tools in Azure can help you with things like threat detection, the new Azure Sentinel components? I mean, there's lots of capabilities in Azure that can help keep bad actors away from your system. And last but not least, governance. So how do you actually keep track of who's doing what? And how do you make sure that your deployment management is on track? And how do you make sure that the right people are looking at the right things and not at the wrong things? Which is maybe the most fundamental definition of governance that I can come up with. Some of that is security, some of it is compartmentalization, some of it is data location. But if you have data that lives in the EU, you really need to understand governance down to the country level, and what data is allowed to come in and out, and what data is allowed to be accessed or kept or stored. You gotta know, because it's a legal issue and you got to really understand it. And it's important. People take their data and their privacy seriously. I'm tired of getting, my daily, hey, your information was found in another data breach alert. And so this is going to continue to be a very important and serious thing as we continue to go forward. So last but not least, my top 4 resources for migrations. One is the Azure Migration Center, and we'll upload this PowerPoint later so you guys will all get a copy of it. These are hyperlinked so you can click through. The Azure Migration Center is Microsoft's one-stop shop for everything Azure migration. Microsoft Docs is the new version of MSDN. MSDN was pretty terrible. Microsoft Docs is awesome. They've completely redesigned it. It looks like they've rewritten most of it. I don't envy that task, but they've done a great job. Very tactical, specific help with good resources. And then if you're not familiar with our YouTube channel, we run a series called Azure Every Day, where we publish a new Azure video every single day of the week. It's totally free. It's on YouTube. There's no sign up for anything. We make those available to you all the time. And if there's anything you ever want to see on there, or anything you want us to do a video topic on, please email me, A. Jorgensen at pragmaticworks.com. I'll put that back up there for you guys. And then we also have an executive migration guide, which I think is actually linked down at the bottom of the page there, but you can also find it on our website, which is great if you need to give it to your manager or an executive just to think through this process. It kind of covers some of the things that we talked about, but certainly not at the same level of detail. So with that, I want to thank you guys very much. If you have any questions, we have just a couple minutes left, and I will try to either throw them in the chat, and I'll try to grab them. I see some great comments in here. Somebody said, I want to play this for management because they just want to move to the cloud because it sounds cool, but they have no idea what it will take or how long. That's why I did this session, because there are so many companies that want to move. They don't know what it means. But it's really a challenge. So if you guys have any questions, or if you want to follow up on anything, please feel free to email me, ajorgensen at pragmaticworks.com. I am certainly available for you guys. I'm happy to answer any questions. And we'll make sure the slide deck is available. I know that one's probably a little bit small on the screen, a little difficult to read, so I'll make sure you guys have it. I kind of built it to be able to share. And so hopefully you guys will get some value out of it. So with that, have a great rest of your Azure Data Week. We're certainly glad that you joined us. We appreciate your time. And it looks like, at least for most of you, a super valuable session, and I really appreciate your time. So thanks a bunch and have a great week.
All right, thanks, Adam. We greatly appreciate it. For those of you, it is 9:56 right now, so if you guys are interested in attending the next session, please just click up in your left-hand corner, and it should take you to the next session. The recording will be available probably about 10 minutes after this ends. But if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Adam or myself, and we hope that you guys are enjoying the rest of your Azure Data Week. Thanks so much, guys.